Okay, we're going to go ahead and get the workshop started this afternoon. Just wanted to thank you for participating in our public workshop for Contingency Measures State Implementation Plan Update and District Rule 4901, wood burning fireplaces and wood burning heaters and other potential rule amendments. We have staff members participating in person and via Zoom video teleconference. We will do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with public participation via Zoom video and audio teleconference. Before we begin, I want to review some important guidelines and general instructions for the meeting. Please silence your cell and desk phones. This will ensure that we do not hear any feedback that can interrupt the meeting. Only district staff will be visible via Zoom. Members of the public are asked to unmute themselves when they are recognized to make a public comment. After the presentation, staff will announce the public comment period has opened, and staff will recognize any public attendee who has indicated they wish to speak. On the Zoom video application, please press raise hand button at the bottom of your screen so that you may be recognized to speak, and be sure to unmute yourself. You can also submit comments via Zoom through the Q&A feature. Written comments may be sent to the webcast@valier.org email address. The mailbox will be monitored during the workshop, and comments received will be read aloud by staff during the public comment period. So thank you for listening to those instructions. So we're going to go ahead and get the presentation started. We're going to, go ahead, please. We have another introduction here.
Muy buenas tardes a todos, bienvenidos a la reunión. A través de esta reunión vamos a tener interpretación simultánea al español. Si usted necesita interpretación simultánea, a favor de seleccionar el icono que aparece un mundo abajo de su pantalla si usted está en una computadora o una tableta. Si usted está usando un celular, sus opciones van a ser diferentes. Usted va a seleccionar los tres puntitos que indican more o más abajo de su pantalla. Después de seleccionar ya sea el icono de mundo o los tres puntitos, entonces usted va a seleccionar su lenguaje de preferencia, en este caso va a ser español. Le invitamos a poner el audio original en silencio o mute original audio para que de esta manera usted pueda escuchar la presentación en su lenguaje de preferencia. Por último, si está usando un celular o una tableta, a favor de seleccionar listo o finalizado para que esto active la función. Con esto le dejo saber a través de la reunión si va a haber oportunidades para comentarios, puede hacer comentarios en su lenguaje de preferencia. So throughout tonight's meeting, we will have simultaneous interpretation. If you are a monolingual English only speaker, we also welcome you to select the interpretation icon, which is the world-like icon at the bottom of the screen. If you're on a phone or a tablet, your options are different. You will actually select the three dots that indicate more at the bottom of the screen and then select your language preference, which in this case will be English. This way, if we do have any Spanish comments, you will be able to hear the interpretation in real time. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. Appreciate it. So before we get started, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm John Klass, and I'm the Director of Air Quality Science and Planning here at the Air District. I'm joined by Emily Nealon to my left, Program Manager. To my right is Patrick Houlihan, Supervising Air Quality Specialist, and Kyle Matsumura, Air Quality Specialist. We're also joined by Kirsten Ho from the California Air Resources Board, and other CARB staff will be on the line too to help answer questions and hear any comments. So with that, let's go ahead and call up the presentation. We'll get this started and give you some background on this workshop here this afternoon. So I wanted to give a brief overview of the challenges we have here in the Valley for air quality. We really have a lot of challenges in front of us because of an unmatched, unique combination of both our topography and our meteorology. We have mountain ranges to the east, to the west, to the south of us. We often have weather conditions that place a lid over the bowl of the valley, trapping emissions that can then lead to higher levels of both ozone, PM 2.5, exceeding the air quality standards. Because of that, we are what's called extreme non-attainment for ozone and serious non-attainment for PM 2.5. And because of that, we need to have substantial emissions reductions achieved to be able to meet these federal standards. And we need to go beyond already strict control limits to get these emissions reductions. We already have a very stringent regulatory program in place, and we need even further emissions reductions to help us get to these federal standards. And since this discussion this afternoon is about PM 2.5, we wanted to show a little bit of detail here on what is PM 2.5 if you don't have this background. So PM 2.5 are particles with a diameter that is 2.5 microns or smaller. So this is very small. If you look on that image on the right-hand side, you can see an example of the width of a human hair there. And those blue particles there across that human hair are PM10 particles. PM 2.5 is even smaller, where 4 PM 2.5 particles can fit across the diameter of a PM10 particle. So these particles are very small, and they can cause a lot of impact to human health. They can be a mixture of solid particles, liquid droplets in the air. These can be emitted directly or formed indirectly through secondary chemical reactions between different gases that can then form particulate matter. And they can get deep into the lungs that we show in this graphic here on the right-hand side. The smaller the particles are, the deeper they can get into the lungs. They can get into the bloodstream, causing a number of health issues that we have here on this slide. Aggravated asthma, increased respiratory symptoms, decreased lung function, irregular heartbeats, cardiovascular hospitalizations, bronchitis, and lung cancer, and other types of health issues that can come up from exposure. So our governing board here, we've adopted a number of attainment plans and air quality strategies over the decades to reduce emissions across the region to help meet these federal standards. We have stationary source ozone and PM forming NOx emissions. Those have been reduced by over 90% through hundreds of regulatory actions under what's under our jurisdiction. On the state side, the California Air Resources Board, they've adopted a number of very stringent mobile source emissions reductions, and a combined effort of what we've done here locally, what CARB has done on the state level. This really is the nation's toughest emissions control program in the nation. We also have a strong incentive program where about $5 billion have been spent on both public and private investment on our incentive programs to turn over equipment, get the cleanest equipment out there, reduce emissions. And with all these efforts, we're continuing to make major improvements in reducing emissions and improve our air quality. And the chart we have here on the right-hand side of the slide shows how much has changed in the valley here. These are NOx emissions throughout the valley. Looking back at the year 1980, where we once were, then going forward in time to 2022, about a 42-year period here, we've reduced overall NOx by about 75% across the region. And then in stationary source, the category specifically, we've reduced NOx by about 93%, showing how much progress has been made here. And this is translated to big changes in the air quality. This is showing PM 2.5 specifically across the valley. On the left-hand side, this is PM 2.5 on a 24-hour average. And so if you look across the time here on the left-hand side, you see about 20 years ago in 2003, you can see those areas of orange and red. Those are areas of higher concentrations of 24-hour average PM 2.5. Then progressing through time, you see this continuing to improve, where we're looking at in the future in 2024 how clean we're expected to be. And then on the right-hand side, this is PM 2.5 on an annual average, so not just a one-day average, but averaging the whole year. You can see similar progress of how much higher the concentrations used to be back in 2003, and then how much better it's been in recent years, and where we're expected to go in the coming years. Did want to provide a little bit of background too on our planning efforts for PM 2.5, since that is what we're talking about here this afternoon. Our 2018 PM 2.5 plan, which was adopted by us at the district here and CARB, this demonstrated attainment of the 3 PM 2.5 standards that were set by EPA in 1997, 2006, and 2012. And this plan included stringent stationary and mobile source control measures, incentive-based control measures, a lot of different efforts to accelerate the deployment of new clean vehicles and equipment, different technologies. And we did want to note here too that this plan was revised in October 21, specifically for the 1997 standard, and that is with EPA for their review as well. Within this plan, we had a measure for Rule 4901, which is about wood-burning fireplaces and wood-burning heaters, which we'll talk more about this afternoon as well. Within our plan, we had a contingency measure that we proposed within this wood-burning rule that could be triggered if we fail to attain in different elements. This measure was disapproved by EPA in November of 2021, and because of that, we're now then required to develop a new contingency measure for the PM 2.5 standards, which we'll give some more detail on shortly. So the purpose of this workshop is to talk about that process. What is a contingency measure? What's the definition and the evaluation we're going through to develop a new measure to be in place for our PM 2.5 plans. And we really do need support from EPA in the work that we're doing. We need timely EPA action on these issues. Like I mentioned, we need to have this submitted because of EPA's disapproval of our previous contingency measure. We are working to address evolving requirements. EPA did just release new guidance for contingency requirements just last week, last Friday. This came out on March 17th. So we are reviewing this closely. There are some sanctions clocks that are ticking for both contingency and plan elements that are 18 and 24-month clocks that we're working against. At the same time, EPA is also obligated to put together what's called a federal implementation plan to propose this by the end of July of this year under a recently signed consent decree. So there's a lot of activity going on around contingency right now between the work that we're doing, some of the work that EPA is doing, and with the guidance that they just came out with. We are working closely with CARB to offer support to EPA as they also evaluate opportunities out there for contingency for both state-sharing measures, for mobile source measures. And based on our evaluation so far, there really are limited opportunities for what can fall under what's defined for contingency. And at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Emily to give us some more background on the definition of the contingency measure and some of the analysis we're conducting.
Perfect. Thanks, John, and good afternoon, everyone. So contingency measures are challenging for a couple of reasons. First, the district is designated as non-attainment under multiple national ambient air quality standards. So not only do we have to develop and adopt rules or contingency measures for one standard, we have to adopt it for every standard that we're designated as non-attainment for. As John mentioned, we're also already implementing the most stringent measures feasible, and so there's really limited opportunities for us to find a rule that we're currently already not implementing the most stringent measures feasible for. Additionally, under current guidance, contingency measures have to achieve a high amount of emission reductions. And as I mentioned, there's already a scarcity of measures for us available, let alone measures that achieve an immense amount of emission reduction. Also, under current policy, contingency measures have to be implemented automatically upon a trigger event, which we'll talk about here in a few slides. And this is infeasible for the majority of control technologies as they take time and planning to install and get up and running. And then lastly, contingency measures are difficult because there's a scarcity of measures that fit the constraints within the definition and the evolving interpretation through recent court rulings. So as John mentioned, EPA recently came out with draft guidance on contingency measures this last Friday, which included a number of key components that they were providing guidance on. The first is the amount of emission reductions that are needed for contingency. As I mentioned, the previous definition or requirements were really stringent and difficult for us to meet that limit. So the new approach is coined 1 year's worth of progress. And through this, we would have to determine the average annual reductions between the base year emissions inventory and the projected attainment year emissions inventory. We'd have to determine what the percentage of the base year amount represents, apply that percentage to the projected attainment year emissions inventory in order to determine the amount of reductions that are needed. And then on top of that, they're also providing guidance that if a contingency measure or a number of measures does not fulfill this amount of reductions needed, that areas such as the district could demonstrate a lack of feasible measures or an infeasibility justification. Additionally, they're also looking at revising the time period in which reductions have to be achieved. So previously, reductions had to be achieved within 1 year of a contingency trigger. And so now they're looking at revising that to up to 2 years, depending on feasibility and providing additional information. And then notably, the draft guidance does not include any information about requirements for EPA to find contingency measures for sources under their jurisdiction. So this requirement is imposed solely on the district and the state. So over the last few months, we've been looking at any opportunities that are available. We've looked at analyses that were conducted as part of our 2022 ozone plan, which were for our NOx and VOC rules. And then also at our 2018 PM 2.5 plan, which evaluated our PM 2.5 and NOx rules. And through the 2018 PM 2.5 plan, EPA did determine that the district was implementing the most stringent measures required. And this was upheld in court in April of 2022. There's also a recent final EPA Interstate Transport FIP, or Federal Implementation Plan, that came out this month that included a number of emissions limits that are less stringent than our current rules. So this just further supports that our rules are already the most stringent measures feasible. So through this, we're conducting a new comprehensive evaluation for contingency to identify any opportunities available. And based on our analysis and evidence, there's limited opportunities for feasible measures here in the Valley. And through this process, we've been having extensive interagency meetings and discussions with the California Air Resources Board, as well as EPA on our evaluation and on their draft guidance. So through this process, we've evaluated a number of sources where there may be some opportunities, either opportunities where we would pursue this as measures in our 2023 PM 2.5 plan, or we may hold them in reserve for contingency requirements. So some of these sources include residential wood burning, dust from rural open areas, commercial under-fired charbroiling, nut harvesting activities, as well as state and federal mobile sources. So the first measure that we're considering is for Rule 4901, which is our rule for residential wood burning, which was recently approved by EPA as meeting the most stringent measures requirements. So through our approach, we would be looking to establish a progressively more stringent curtailment level or levels by a tiered approach. And this would be triggered upon each contingency requirement. The first is to meet any reasonable further progress requirement, meaning that we're making progress toward attainment of the standard, meet any quantitative milestone in an attainment plan, submit a quantitative milestone report, or attain the applicable NAAQS, or National Ambient Air Quality Standard, by its attainment date. And notably, South Coast, their Rule 445 contains a similar contingency measure provision, but it is less stringent than the district's current rule requirements. And EPA did approve their contingency measure as meeting all of the PM 2.5 requirements in April of 2022. So this is one example of one of the strategies that we're considering. So through this, we would be looking to lower the level 1 wood burning curtailment for hotspot and non-hotspot counties by 1 microgram upon a trigger of failing to attain one of the PM 2.5 standards. And if a non-hotspot county caused the failure to attain based on their monitoring values, then they would then be subject to the level 1 and level 2 wood burning curtailments of the hotspot counties. And then for a valley-wide contingency issues such as failure to meet reasonable further progress, submit a quantitative milestone report, or meet a quantitative milestone, that would result in all valley counties being subject to the hotspot curtailment levels. And just one more point on that, the emission reductions that we've estimated from this particular strategy is as high as 0.88 tons per day of PM 2.5 and as high as 0.09 tons per day of NOx on an annual average. Another source category that we're currently evaluating is Rule 8051, which is our rule for dust from open areas. An open area is a vacant portion of residential or commercial lot and contiguous parcel that is not immediately adjacent to and owned or operated by the same individual or entity. And notably, this does not apply to ag sources, which are subject to our CMP rule. Our current requirement in the rule is that urban open areas greater than half an acre and rural open areas greater than 3 acres, if they're disturbing 1,000 square feet or greater, they would have to limit their visible dust emissions to no greater than 20% opacity. The contingency measure provision that we're currently evaluating is amending the 3-acre rural applicability threshold to a lower level upon one of those EPA triggers that I went over on the previous slide. This source category was specifically suggested by EPA, given that this is a contingency measure that was adopted in Imperial County. And notably, the contingency measure for Imperial County only included a number of the actual required triggers. It did not include the attainment trigger. There was no quantified emission benefit. However, EPA still approved this measure in August of 2019. We're also continuing to evaluate commercial under-fired charbroiling and almond harvesting for contingency opportunities. For commercial under-fired charbroiling, we've continued to evaluate this source category over a number of years. specifically the feasibility of the technologies that are available. And we specifically have to consider that many of the technologies are not demonstrated or available. And there's also fire certification issues for a number of the technologies. There's also excessive capital and maintenance costs, as well as other feasibility issues for existing restaurants. And there's also a need for new certification programs in order to provide the necessary assurances to restaurants, such as emission certification, durability, warranty, and safety precautions as well. For almond harvesting, the district has worked closely over a number of years with USDA, NRCS, CARB, and the agricultural sector to test and demonstrate low dust nut harvesting technologies. We launched a new low dust nut harvester program as part of the 2018 PM 2.5 plan, and USDA NRCS also offers incentive funding for low dust nut harvesting practices. So some considerations are that there's a need for continued research, testing, certification of the latest technologies. And there's also a need for enhanced funding, including new available Inflation Reduction Act funding, as well as other funding sources. So for both of these categories, we'll be providing additional updates and recommendations in the coming year as our evaluation progresses. And lastly, I wanted to note that mobile sources continue to make up the majority of emissions here in the Valley, and there's a need for federal support on contingency measures. And given the fact, as we've mentioned a couple of times through this presentation, the district and CARB are already implementing the most stringent measures feasible. And so it's really critical that the federal government provide their fair share to support our efforts. Specifically, they could look to reduce emissions under their control, such as interstate trucks, locomotives, and aircraft. There's also unprecedented funding opportunities under the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law. And we're looking to see prioritization of funding for areas in extreme and serious non-attainment, environmental justice communities, affordable housing and sustainable community efforts, as well as port and freight projects, sustainable agriculture, forest management, and energy programs. And with that, I'll pass it over to Kirsten Ho to go over the CARB slides.
Great, thanks, Emily. So alongside the district efforts, CARB has also been working to explore contingency measure options that are within our authority. We are evaluating all of CARB's regulations in an effort to identify potential options that could apply in San Joaquin Valley and across the state. When evaluating our potential options, we want to ensure that the measure we are considering will achieve reductions that are beyond what's needed for meeting air quality standards, since contingency measures are to be held in reserve and will only go into effect in the event of a failure to attain or a failure to meet a reasonable further progress milestone. Next slide. Great. However, CARB and California as a whole have unique challenges to identifying viable options that will meet requirements under historic and also new US EPA guidance for contingency measures. CARB has over 50 years of experience controlling our state's emissions from mobile and other sources. CARB programs are mature, with many sources being driven to zero emissions, which limits the opportunities for a contingency measure. Additionally, CARB is only able to regulate sources within its authority, and primarily federally regulated sources are a significant portion of the state's emissions, amounting to more than half of statewide mobile source NOx emissions, further limiting CARB's options. Extreme ozone areas, including the San Joaquin Valley, also face the toughest air quality challenges in the country. Should there be a measure that could reduce emissions enough to improve the air quality in the area, CARB would adopt and implement that measure to improve air quality and support expeditious attainment rather than hold them in reserve. The upcoming Federal Implementation Plan, or FIP, also adds an additional constraint, as the timing of the FIP further limits our options. The state and district need to have a contingency measure adopted and approved by EPA ahead of the final FIP deadline to avoid the FIP going into place and to resolve sanctions. Next slide, please. Despite the challenges, CARB is analyzing control measures for all sources under CARB authority to identify potential contingency measure options. These sources include light, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles and trucks, off-road equipment, commercial hovercraft, locomotives, space and water heaters, and others listed here. For all of these sources, CARB has programs currently in place or under development, and we are evaluating a variety of regulatory mechanisms within our existing and new programs for potential contingency triggers. One approach we continue to explore is episodic controls. However, the new EPA guidance still does not provide clarity on the use of episodic controls as a contingency measure. Next slide. This analysis to identify potential contingency measures involves evaluating each option based on several criteria. First, is it needed for attainment? Any measure CARB adopts for contingency would need to achieve reductions beyond what is needed for attainment. Otherwise, it would be included as a SIP measure for attainment purposes. Second, can it be triggered and implemented within 60 days and achieve reductions within 1 year? Contingency measures are meant to achieve reductions over the course of the year while a new plan is being developed, so should be implemented within 60 days of being triggered by an EPA finding, and subsequently should achieve the required reductions by the following year. Though EPA's new draft guidance states that they would consider measures that could achieve reductions within 2 years. Third, is the technology feasible or economically feasible to require? The measure requirements may be unavailable or cost prohibitive to implement, especially in the time frame required for contingency. Lastly, can the measure be adopted by CARB and approved by EPA within the current FIP timeline? The measure would need to have gone through its full regulatory process, which for CARB includes approval by the state's Office of Administrative Law, and be submitted and approved by EPA within the next 1.5 years. Next slide. Based on staff's initial analysis, there are a few components of CARB regulations that limit CARB's options for a contingency measure. Based on the EPA FIP timeline, CARB would need to find a measure that could realistically be adopted within the next year. However, most CARB measures must go through the regulatory process for adoption that can take approximately 5 years from start to finish. CARB regulations that require fleet turnover or new engine standards also require a long lead time. New engine standards require time for original engine manufacturers to design, plan, manufacture, and deploy cleaner engines. Fleet regulations necessitate that manufacturing is mature so that there is enough supply available to meet that demand. It also requires time for procurement implementation and also may require additional time for infrastructure installation. CARB regulations are also technology forcing, which makes it very difficult to pull compliance timelines forward as industry needs time to plan, develop, and implement these new technologies. CARB regulations are also the most stringent requirements in the country, so there are a few opportunities to require additional stringency. Additionally, CARB is driving sources under our authority to zero emissions everywhere feasible. CARB's push to zero emissions is necessary for attainment of air quality standards across the state and for supporting near source toxics reductions and climate targets. But this also eliminates opportunities for contingency. Next slide. In terms of next steps, while we are facing these challenges, CARB will continue this measure analysis and look for contingency measure opportunities. We also welcome suggestions for an input on contingency measures. EPA has just released new draft guidance for contingency measures, and CARB is currently reviewing and will evaluate the implications of this new guidance if finalized as currently proposed. CARB is determined to identify viable contingency measures within state programs alongside the actions of San Joaquin Valley and other districts across the state to meet this requirement, and we will continue to work with EPA and the district on developing practical contingency measures. Thanks.
Thanks, Kirsten. So as far as next steps, following this workshop, we'll be accepting public comments for formally 2 weeks, written public comments, but you can submit comments throughout the entire process. We'll be publishing for 30-day public review and comment ahead of a governing board hearing in the second quarter of this year. And then following governing board adoption, we would submit the package and rule amendments to EPA through CARB. And as I mentioned, we invite public comment and input throughout this entire process. So the contact, if you would like to submit written comments, would be Kyle Masamura on my team. His email and contact information is here on the slide. And I also invite you to visit our listserv on our website to sign up for email updates to get additional notifications following the workshop as we publish draft documents and notice of public hearing. So with that, we'll open up for comments and questions. And if you're here in person, I invite you to step up to the podium to share your comments or questions. If you're on Zoom, feel free to raise your hand and we will get to those after the in-person public comments. You can also submit comments to webcast@valleyair.org. And then we've also enabled the Q&A function through Zoom if you'd like to submit comments through there as well. Thank you.
What?
Hold on, go ahead. The mic wasn't on.
Yeah,
Oh.
go ahead, John. We just turned
I'm
the mic
sorry, I
on
was
for you.
told to come to the podium. You weren't ready, huh? All right, so let me get this clear. EPA disapproved in November of 2021, and we're just now getting to the contingency measures? The alternative to what they disapproved 18 months ago. Is that fair?
It was a disapproval, yeah, at the end of 2021, and yeah, so now we are at the point now with the guidance now available from EPA to know how to work through this. We're working through this.
Well, the guidance didn't come until very recently, so you must have had extensive conversations with the regional office.
Yeah.
So basically, CARB's no help because they take 5 years to think about anything. The EPA is not helping you. So this is it, right? This handful of contingency measures is the best the district can come up with.
So like we mentioned in the presentation, wood burning is what we're looking at. Open areas is another option. There are other sources we're also looking at closely, like we had in one of the slides. There could be more that could be part of this package that we're evaluating right now.
But wait, you're going to submit these within a very short time, right?
It's a challenge. It's a very short time.
You can't be evaluating too much left. I'm sorry. I just. All right. So one thing that was not in here is what's the trigger? What is the annual average that the district has managed to get it down to in 2022?
So right now our annual average is around 16 micrograms per meter cubed. The different triggers that we have built into our proposed contingency for the wood burning rule is if we miss attainment by the attainment date, and these are required in the Clean Air Act for PM 2.5.
Right.
Missing the attainment date, missing a RFP milestone, missing a quantitative milestone, or submitting a quantitative milestone report. If any of those are triggered along the way for any of the standards, then in that table we showed in the slide, the thresholds would be lowered progressively to lower levels to have more no burn days for those different counties that were affected.
Right. So, and what was your 24-hour design worst case in 22?
I think we're around 45 micrograms.
So let me see. So this is for either one of them, basically. Then you're failing to attain in both.
The attainment dates are still in front of us for those standards.
Right.
But yeah, if we miss the attainment date for those, then it could trigger these contingencies.
The glide path doesn't look good. All right. So if we could go to the slide on potential contingency measures, residential wood burning, so that everybody could understand this. I think, as I understand it, this is the crux. So, and of course, which county, just remind me, because it's been a couple of years since I was here, which counties are the hotspot counties?
Those are Madera, Fresno, and Kern.
Okay, I noticed that wasn't in the footnote. Maybe you all know that. All right. So those counties will be the hotspot counties. And right now, a no burn is triggered at 12.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
And, well, no. All right. But no burns aren't really triggered on the annual, are they? I mean, it's the annual, the 65.
Then, so the no burn thresholds that we have are based on a 24-hour average.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So this proposal, you could attain the 24-hour and fail the annual, and it would trigger these contingencies?
It would, yes.
Okay. And triggering the contingency, well, tell us what would take the hotspot counties from 12 to 11? Would it be after one full year and you'd evaluate and say, okay, we failed to make the 24-hour, now we'll do it? Or would it be automatic? Or
It would be,
walk
yes,
us through this.
it would be after a final EPA finding that we failed to miss the attainment deadline for a specific county. And if that were the case, then it would go into effect in the next winter season that we use these lower thresholds. So if EPA were to come out with a finding that we failed to attain a standard, there could be a list of all the different counties and what the levels were.
Right.
And based on that, if some counties were the ones that made the valley miss the attainment deadline, those counties, if they were not hotspot, they would become hotspots in the next winter season. And then if it was a hotspot county that failed to attain, they would also go down by 1 microgram to that 1135 threshold, that contingency measure number 1 line, that first line there.
All right. And given how fast EPA has moved recently, there would be probably some gap there in time, but that's to be determined. So, and then a subsequent year, failure to attain the subsequent year, and it moves down to contingency measure 2?
Yep. If there are more triggers that happen, and you keep progressively going down those four different measures. Yes.
So one of the questions that I think the folks who are involved in wood burning issues is, how robust is the district's enforcement of their current measure?
It's a strong program. We always have staff out in the neighborhoods in the evenings, watching the activity, especially on no burn evenings. We have a lot of staff out. They find violations. They issue tickets. They do.
Any idea how many NOVs?
It's 2022. It's always a few hundred per winter season. Maybe Patrick, you have some more.
Yeah. It's in the past years. It's been around 700.
All right. Good. All right. I may have further questions, but I'll shut up and think about for a bit.
Okay. Thank you.
If somebody else got that.
Any other comments here in Fresno? Better in person? Okay, let's go to Modesto. We see somebody in Modesto. Any public comment in Modesto? Looks like we're okay there. And I don't see anybody in Bakersfield.
Sure.
Is there anybody? Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, John. Let me get the gentleman at the podium for you, okay?
Okay, thank you. Yes.
And hey, John, you are correct. There are no members of the public here in Bakersfield.
Okay, thank you.
So I've moved to the, do I have to push a button here?
No, we can hear you. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, you just can't see me. Okay, so the question I had was, on the contingency triggers, that just triggers another no burn night. Is that correct? Or is there any other measures that you're considering along with those contingency measures?
Besides the wood burning one that we went over, there's a potential of that open area measure that we described in one of the slides, where dust control actions would have to be taken on different urban properties with a certain number of acreage. So dust control measures for open areas and then wood burning. Yes. Okay.
And then, but on the wood burning, it's just going to be a do not burn wood tonight.
Yeah, the consequence of it would be lowering those thresholds. So there would be no burn days during the winter season for those counties.
And in the definition of no burn days, that means nothing can be burned, including anything that's EPA certified, as well as open burning fireplaces. All that technology is being treated equally, correct?
So it would still, even with our contingency measure, there would still be an allowance for EPA certified devices to be used, just how it is right now. There's a threshold, there's a range there where EPA certified devices could be used. That would still be retained. It would just be non-hotspot counties would go to hotspot county levels if they fail to attain. And if a hotspot county fails to attain, it would go down by 1 microgram for that first level of threshold. But there'd still be a range there for certified devices to be used.
What is the current range that you're working with?
For the hotspot counties, anywhere from 12 to 35 micrograms certified wood burning devices can be used. And then in non-hotspot counties, that ranges from 20 to 65 micrograms.
I see. And if we drop below those levels, then are we then eliminating the use of certified product?
That's not in our proposal for this contingency. That allowance would still be there. It would just shift if in that slide it'd take a while. You have to kind of look at that
I
slide
know it's
closely.
like 4 or 5 years. You have to trigger and lower. And
Yeah,
trigger
there's a
and
number
lower,
of
correct?
triggers that could happen year by year,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
All right, so even if in the worst case scenario it went for 2, 3, 4 years in a row, there's still a caveat that EPA certified products could be used, but open burning certainly would not be able to be used. Is that correct?
Yeah, certified devices could still be used within that range, and then open hearth fireplaces could still be used, but there would be fewer days when those types of devices could be used.
Okay, great. And there's no other restrictions beyond just no restrictions on the use of solid fuel. There's no other caveats in terms of technology restrictions.
No, we're not proposing anything along those lines in this proposal. Yeah.
Super.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, just for the record, can you tell us your name?
Oh, my name is Jay Hansen. I'm with the Hearth Patio Barbecue Association.
All right. Thank you, Jay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we've got a comment here in Fresno.
Hi. I'm Bob Hahn from Buckstove and Visayas. If I'm reading this right, nothing's really going to change unless it gets a little crappier next year. Is that correct? Because the levels, and we had a wonderful year. I don't think we had very many no burn days. I'd like to see what this last year has been as far as air quality with the wood burning. Lots of rain, a lot of clean days, but I'm stuck right in the middle in Tulare County. I got hot spots to the north of me, hot spots to the south of me. So at this point, we're going to stay where we're at. Is that correct?
Yeah, the only change if we do trigger one of these elements, we don't attain the standard in one of the counties, another one of these contingency elements get triggered, it would likely create more no burn days during the winter season. If it's a more stable winter season.
For the whole year, for the year of 2024 season, say. So we could not actually even get triggered down into a hot spot till 2025.
It could be a year in the future. Yeah, it could. Depends on it when something gets triggered. Yeah, it may not be next season. It could be a few years down the road.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of tough being in the middle where these guys are getting heavier incentives and our air quality isn't a whole lot better than what these two other counties were. So that's all.
Thank you.
Can I ask more?
Sure. Go ahead.
All right. Just so really the dynamic delta here, the real change is for a hotspot or non-hotspot county to fail and go and become a hotspot county. That's the real delta, right?
That's the biggest change that could happen. If a hotspot county triggers something, they would also go down by 1 microgram. So they get a little more stringent too if you look down those rows.
Yeah, but I mean, right now, their episodic controls are being triggered at 20 and cutting off all burning at 65. So they would go to 12 and 35 as a first step.
That's right.
That would be something they'd notice that one. And then they'd start down the path 11. Okay,
yeah,
got
that's
it.
Right.
So pick one of your hotspot counties. I'm sure you've done the math for your senior leaders. What would be the difference between what would have been the difference between 12 and 11 in terms of number of episodic control days? Say Fresno.
Right. We're doing that analysis. And before we take this package to our governing board, there'll be the full documentation. We'll have like an estimated number of increased no burn days. Like you're asking, if some of these things get triggered, the emissions reductions that could come from that.
Okay.
So we'll include all of that in our documentation we're building.
Great.
It'll make it clear. Yeah.
I just want to add one thing. This is not part of the rulemaking, but I hope that your enforcement people, when they see someone using a certified stove poorly or incorrectly, that they send them to their dealer or they write them up. If I remember correctly, your rule does not allow you to make smoke just because it's a certified stove, correct?
That's right.
Good. Yeah, that's been our industry's position for years. That should not be a get out of jail free card. You got to burn dry wood and use the thing right. So, but one of the things that sometimes happens is people buy the house and they don't understand how to use the certified stove that came with it. And I hope your enforcement people will always refer them to one of the dealers in their area, because many times we just go on the internet and print them out their owner's manual that, of course, the owner's manual never comes with the house, and help them learn how to use the stove correctly, because it's obviously in our interest to help make that happen. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Now I understand.
Okay, any other comments here in Fresno, in person? Okay. Any comments on Zoom?
I see one comment on Zoom from Thomas Mentz. He asks, what were the contingency measures in the 2018 plan for the hotspot counties?
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. So the way we had written it before in the previous plan for the wood burning rule specifically was that if a non-hotspot county failed to attain, or if the valley failed to attain one of the standards by the deadline, the non-hotspots would become hotspots. There were other pieces of the contingency strategy within that plan, like HARP had and their piece of it, and all of it together was our contingency strategy. But with the approach we're taking now, even the hotspot counties would have a change if they fail to attain. So it is an approach that has an effect for all counties across the valley compared to what we had before. So thanks for asking that.
Stephanie, do we have any hands raised here on Zoom? Our first comment is from Perry.
Good afternoon. My name is Perry Ellerts. I'm with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. The PM 2.5 and ozone zips present an opportunity to once and for all map out a strategy for how the Valley aims to finally reach and maintain safe air quality levels. Unfortunately, neither plan has contingency measures, which are required by the Clean Air Act. Given the difficulty for the Air District to meet many of the NAAQS standards and failure to meet multiple Clean Air Act deadlines, it's vital that contingency measures are included in these plans. And now that EPA has released guidance for contingency measures, we are very happy to see that the Air District is holding this workshop and contemplating contingency measures for wood-burning fireplaces and heaters and potentially other measures. Leadership Council and others have put forth many potential emission controls in the past and other SIP comments that could be used to either more expeditiously meet the NAAQS standards or act as contingency measures. For example, we have suggested many ways to further strengthen the indirect source rule. We have also recommended additional pesticide controls with help from DPR, and we've recommended improvements to the animal confinement rule under Rule 4570, requiring emission reductions beyond offering an optional menu of controls. Those are a few priority examples where we and others have highlighted where the Air District, for the Air District and CARB to consider for contingency measures. Thank you for your time.
Our next comment is from Janet.
Thank you. This is Janet Dietz-Kamay. And I had no asthma until I moved to the San Joaquin Valley. I had no idea that moving to San Joaquin Valley was putting me in such a dangerous situation, and my husband and all of the residents in the valley. You opened the opening comment support that we need more stringent methods to reduce pollution. Focusing on reducing pollutants that will eliminate the need for contingency measures is ridiculous. We need to be focusing on reducing the pollutants for everyone who lives here, for all of us who suffer living in this valley. Now, I have repeatedly said through these workshops for years now, a real quick and inexpensive way to help reduce the pollution is to ban residential burning. Ban residential burning. except for those who have no other options for heating a home. Why do we need to have residential burning? The houses now are being built without fireplaces. My house does not have a fireplace. Reducing PM 2.5, black carbon, can be done by banning residential burning. Now, the problem with that is enforcement. I called a number of times during the winter inversion months, during the months of check before you burn. And the only one that was actually accomplished was one that was called in the daytime. The majority of people are not burning during the daytime, they're burning their fireplaces at night. There must be some way to be able to detect that somebody is using a fireplace at night. I know there are ways to detect that. But the enforcement part of it is a requirement. It has to be done. People are not going to stop using their fireplaces simply because someone says don't use them. They don't have any invested interest in it, and if it's just don't use them. And I do appreciate that on social media and on TV commercial, I see you occasionally as a TV in between programs. I'll call it a commercial. That's not what it really is, but I see that. And I see on the weather reports now that they do advise whether you can use a fireplace or not. Now, I keep harping on this because I get sick. And I'm not the only one in this valley who gets sick. There are a lot of us who are sickened by this air. I really appreciated that most of the year, Fresno was on no burning at all. I very much appreciated that. And I did comment on that. But without the enforcement, there still was smoke in my neighborhood. There was smoke so bad that I couldn't dare go outside to take the dog out. Sadly, my husband had to do it. Contingency is great. But why don't we focus on preventing any need for contingency? Why don't we focus on reducing the pollutants in a very quick way? There's no residential burning. This is very frustrating to me. Tomorrow we will be talking about PM 2.5. Please, I see on the wall behind you, air pollution control. That reads right behind you. If you turn around, you can see the words air pollution control. And that would reduce the problem of contingency measures. Thank you for your attention and thank you for your work on this. But let's see if we can't reduce the pollution just for the sake of us breathing this air.
Thank you, Janet, for those comments. Really appreciate it. Just wanted to respond a little bit. And yeah, enforcement really is key to this. Definitely, we place a big focus on that. And some of your comments on why can't we just do this right now instead of waiting for some contingency measure, that's the balance that we have to have. And it's the requirement that's out there from EPA is you have to have something held for contingency just in case you don't attain or you miss some sort of a milestone, and wait to do that until you trigger something. So yes, I know it often doesn't make sense thinking about this, but it's a requirement through the Clean Air Act that we have to have something in place ready to go just in case we trigger it. So that's what we're working through in this analysis. Any other Zoom comments?
Our next comment is from Kevin.
Hi, Kevin Hamilton with Central California Asthma Collaborative. Good evening. Thank you for a most interesting presentation. Quick question up front. Yeah, the guidance you're referencing is only a draft guidance at this point, correct?
Yeah, it is draft guidance, and EPA is planning to take public comment and then finalize it after that.
Right. You can assume some of us are tracking that very closely and heavily engaged. So I wouldn't necessarily build my house on it as is. So I think we've got time, and there's a lot of comments. This is guidance for the whole nation, not just for the air district, of course. So there's a lot of time here. So I think there may be some of the comments I've heard from the audience suggest that I think some people feel this is a done deal. I'm happy to be corrected on that, but by no means is it. So we're just entering the public comment period at EPA, and if people have concerns, of course, they should address those there. Contact even me if they want to. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of at Central California Asthma Collaborative. I'm happy to talk about that. So it's an interesting choice, wood burning. I think you've done a really good job with wind burning, especially open burning. I just really can't say enough about how great, the work that everyone did together on that. And I feel like, we're seeing the end of that, which is just remarkable, and starting to see that trickle down into other air districts in other parts of the state, looking to the district for guidance on that. Ventura comes to mind right away. And then on this particular wood burning issue, certainly in the AB 617 communities where you've increased stringency there already, I think, we've seen some great work there. And I think it seems to me what you're doing here is trying to kind of extend that to, the whole valley, which is what a number of us have advocated for a long time. And that's great. But I think there's got to be more effective and more diverse types of contingency measures used here than this one. And I would be surprised if you get out of it what you need at that point in time to make the change in the air quality that would be needed to sort of get out from under. In other words, create clean air for folks in that moment. So what I didn't see tonight, and maybe it's there and I didn't see it, was modeling to see exactly, what that would look like when this was triggered, and what evidence there is to show that in fact this particular contingency triggers, and then we actually see, within a reasonable time that the emissions drop to where they need to be. So I think that's really critical before anything happens. And then, you've still got issues other times of the year that are screwing you on the 24-hour, of course. SOx in the summertime, from ammonia, that tends to push you over a few days here and there still. So I just think you're gonna have to cast a little bit wider net before, we get anything that is gonna get us, that we can have confidence and can model that we feel is gonna get us where we need to be. So I do appreciate this sort of beginning though. And it's good to see you guys, because I don't get to see you much anymore. So thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Thank you. And I did want to note too that there was a question in the Zoom Q&A of where they can find the slides for this presentation, and those are posted on our website. So you can go there and find the slides. If you have any questions of where it's at, feel free to get in touch with us here, and we can send you a link and help guide you to that. Any other questions on Zoom or comments?
Okay, our next comment is from Claire.
Hi. I haven't attended for over a year just for personal reasons. We've had things going on, and I didn't know about this meeting until about 10 minutes before it. So I haven't had a chance to look at the slides closely, and I found some of it is difficult to to take in just from hearing the slides read. I do, as I listen to it, I get sort of this dual message. On the one hand, it's like, well, we need to change things. And on the other hand, we've been doing the very best job we can. And so the first, it's sort of like the joke about the farmer when asked directions and keeps pausing and finally says, well, we can't get there from here. And so I feel like that's sort of what this whole process sounds like. It's like, well, we just don't know what to do at this point because we've really done everything we can. And I just want to remind people that, first of all, 42 years, that's almost half a century. So the progress, while wonderful, has nevertheless been slow. That many of the rules that are being touted today as producing the results that have been produced were very much resisted at the time of their implementation. And so there seems to be this just natural progress of resist, implement, and then be glad of the progress that's made. And that is a consistent I get that feeling of having watched this for many years. The one area that I have focused on is the fireplace burning. And of course, I am an advocate for thinking that a few people, compared to all the houses that are being built and so forth, that the people who are in the older homes should not have the right to be able to foul the air for the rest of us. And it seems like we're backing very slowly in with the increase in no burn days and stricter implementation, that we're, talking about lowering the standard to increase the no burn days, that we're slowly backing into this idea of phasing out fireplace burning rather than just perhaps creating a lot of public ire by just saying, we're going to set this date and we'll be done with it. So I'm going to advocate some things that maybe the answer will be, well, that won't get a result fast enough. But I'm going to go through some of the things I've said before. One is at the time of sale, requiring the disabling of fireplaces. And it does seem like an equity thing to me. If you buy a new home, you do not have the right to foul the air. If you buy an older home, for some reason, that's okay. And I think that we would be able to make tremendous progress. There are a lot of homes every year that would have their fireplaces taken out of commission by requiring that they be disabled at the time of sale. For rents, the same thing could happen. There are not as many rental units that have fireplaces, but there are some. The other thing that if we want to take if that's an extreme step, less extreme, is requiring that as part of sales and rental agreements that the document or explanation of the burn cleaner program is provided. I have the person who's moved in behind us this year. They are not English speakers and they burn all the time. It does not matter. No burn day. And I have called before, nothing, has happened. And I think honestly, they just they are not aware that there is even a burn cleaner program. And so those of us who've taken interest in this, of course, we realize there is one, but I think that there are thousands and thousands of people in the Valley who have no idea that there are these restrictions. And so they should be required. Landlords have to register their properties, at least in Fresno, but property management people should have to hand out a thing explaining the burn cleaner program. I think the burn cleaner program should be extended. This March is a perfect example of one in which there have been plenty of days in which people are still burning, even though the season has now ended. So extend that season. That seems to me such an obvious thing. Have it start earlier and have it end later. And that just is a no-brainer for me. And then finally, the enforcement. I know that you're saying you have a lot of, the enforcement is really concentrated on. It seems to me if you call during certain hours, you're able to get somebody and maybe they'll be able to go out, whether the person is still burning. I don't know. The enforcement does not seem to me to work as anywhere near as well as it should. And then the other thing, and I really don't know the practicality of this one at all, to pivot perhaps away from subsidizing fireplace inserts to in some way combining with well, maybe not even combining with solar, but to electric furnaces in the house so that people are not using fireplaces for heating. And that one I can see as being financially problematic, but maybe something that can coordinate with solar subsidies as well as the ones that you give, and trying to change what is being used in the house as the source of heating. The inserts, maybe moving away from those. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks, Claire. Appreciate it. Any other Zoom comments?
Our next comment is from Nayamin.
Hello, everyone. This is Nayamin Martinez with the Central California Environmental Justice Network. I'll keep my comments short. So I agree with the idea of just getting, installing the firewood ban across the region. Why we are still sticking to the hotspot area? If you're having more problems identifying more contingency measures, like just make it region-wide. We don't need to have only other focus on Madera, Fresno, and Kern. It should be region-wide. We don't need to have the use of fireplaces at any time. And if you are still going to keep the curtailment period, you need to start early. I cannot tell you how many times I'm walking out during Halloween and people are already burning that day. And that's before one day before your curtailment period starts. So if you just move it one day, you will get a lot of more violations. But in general, it should be banned. I also agree with the idea of the modeling. And in the modeling, how are you considering ammonia? I think that in the contingency measures, I did not see a lot related to oil and gas, to dairies, to CAFOs. So those are big emitters of our PM 2.5 problem. So if we leave those aside and not consider them for reductions, I think we're going to miss the mark one more time. Thank you.
And we have one more comment from Thomas.
Good afternoon or evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to focus on the wood burning rule, and this echoes a few of the things that Janet and Claire have offered. I have maybe half a dozen suggestions for improvement. First, since we are talking about only the regulation of secondary sources of heat with these wood stoves, the contingency that might be more appropriately considered here this evening, if at long last we should come to fail attainment after all these years, what we should be talking about is a total ban on non-essential use of wood burning devices. That's the contingency measure that should be adopted, in my opinion. Two, whatever lesser measure you do adopt, please have it apply year-round, as other districts have done. My neighbors start burning wood in October, and they're burning wood right now, whenever it's cold enough, even into April and May. So please adopt a rule that applies also to cooking with wood or solid fuel as well, as other districts have also done. Folks commonly light piles of wood on fire for their barbecues, and they do this even on days with really appalling air quality, days with PM 2.5 so high that anyone with any common sense shouldn't even be outside tending them. Three, at best, an EPA certified wood stove produces 450 times the mass of PM 2.5 per unit of energy as a natural gas stove. And as EPA's Inspector General concluded in February, EPA's wood stove certification process is not reliable. The nameplate grams per hour emissions have nothing to do with real world emissions. And so with a certification process that's broken, basically meaningless, there's no sound basis for a two-tiered curtailment threshold strategy. There's no such thing as a clean burning wood heater. And when the increase in ultrafine emissions in these so-called cleaner burning devices are considered, only a single curtailment threshold really is justified. For any contingency measure is only good as its enforcement, as others have already noted. But most wood burning occurs at night, and most district enforcement occurs during the daylight hours, and that's a problem. Monitors show that PM2.5 levels peak late at night, and your compliance staffing does not. 5, I don't know if CARB or EPA or even district staff, some of you are aware of this, but there are homes here that were built with gas heaters, homes that were last sold with a realtor listing the getting gas as a source of heat, homes that still have active gas service in some cases, but these homes are inexplicably being allowed a permanent exemption to Rule 4901, and they're allowed to burn wood whenever they like. And you have to understand that a corrupted administration of the sole source of heat exemption is doubly, triply, quadruply pernicious because it invites a cluster of nearby residences that, seeing that one home is allowed to burn with impunity, decide that it must be okay for them to scoff at the rules as well. And 6, in the southern part of the city of Fresno, if you drive through here, it's daunting to look at block after block and see the numbers of subdivisions over the years that were built with home after home, and they all have masonry fireplaces. And there are even multi-unit complexes in which every apartment or condominium has a chimney. My old neighborhood here has homes with 2 or even 3 fireplaces. Now, your compliance staff is already frequently overwhelmed with complaints and unable to respond in a timely way. Rule 4901 should ease the monumental task of ensuring compliance and require either the conversion to gas or the permanent disabling or removal of wood-burning masonry fireplaces when a home is sold or property changes hands. The vast numbers of these masonry fireplaces, it needs to be included in the District Rule 4901 definition of wood-burning heater. To conclude, if the district's polling is to be believed, most folks living here don't own a wood-burning device. Of those that do have a wood-burning heater, most don't use it. Of those who do burn wood occasionally, most do it rarely. And of those who say they burn wood every day, according to your polling, number less than the polling margin of error. But that group of residences, however small in number, is producing by far the majority of residential heating emissions. And most of that is non-essential. I think we make a fundamental error in the way wood smoke is regulated, given the threat to public health it constitutes. Cigarette smoke contains many of the same pernicious compounds. In fact, EPA tells us that an equal amount of wood smoke is about 12 times worse in terms of carcinogenicity. So imagine today if in your meeting room there, tobacco smoking were to be allowed until PM2.5 levels rose to 12 micrograms per cubic meter, at which point pipes and cigars would need to be extinguished, but low tar cigarettes were continued to allowed to be smoked until levels rose to 35 micrograms. And that would be absurd, right? So why do we allow this same kind of pollution right where we can't escape it, right in our own neighborhoods, right where we're all living and breathing? I think this is a crazy way of regulating something that has such a profound effect. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. Okay, no other comments on Zoom. So any Q&A comments, Kyle?
We have one more additional Q&A comment from Pamela Culip. She asked, what was the email for comments? You can submit all comments to webcast@valleyair.org. Once again, that is webcast@valleyair.org.
Cool. Thank you, Kyle, for that. And any comments through webcast@valleyair.org? Anything in the inbox?
No, nothing in the inbox for webcast.
Okay, nothing in the inbox.
I was just going to add quickly that, again, you could submit written comments, or if you have questions or comments, reach out to Kyle Matsumura. His contact was listed in the email, or his email is listed on the presentation slide.
All right, thanks, Emily. So we'll go ahead and close the workshop for this afternoon, this evening. Really appreciate you being here, hearing the updates, giving your comments and your thoughtfulness to it. We encourage you to track this, follow the work that we're doing, stay involved, continue to provide us comments, or if you have questions, please get in touch with us. And we hope you have a great rest of your evening. And thanks to Kirsten from CARB for being here too, giving her update for the CARB analysis. So have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.